Queer RelationTips, an IM Clinic podcast devoted to helping you, the LGBTQ plus community, create the love lives and relationships you crave.
The Great Resignation has created quite a stir in the world. People are reprioritizing what they want out of life and finding that there is more to life than commuting to a job they don't love to only anticipate a paycheck that won't go very far, to then sit in traffic to only do it all again the next day. As I watch the world transition and see the workforce evolve, I have also heard many people express confusion, despair, and even desperation around finding a job that really honors who they are and their destinies. Today's guest, Stout, is a career coach who comes to us with a wealth of knowledge. If you find yourself wondering what job will really produce life satisfaction, you don't want to miss today's episode. Let's take a listen.
I specialize in the field of career coaching and career counseling. So you'll hear me reference that a little bit throughout this process. But I've been working as really in this field since 2011, so over 10 years, and have done quite a bit of different things. So predominantly kind of my favorite passion area is I really like working with folks really from kind of marginalized backgrounds and communities. I think as a queer person, that's something that's, I've noticed how my queer identity is shaped who I am. So I kind of always think of the three areas I'm working with clients are like, who am I, where am I going, and how will I get there? That spans both career and life coaching. My credentials, I'm a certified career counselor. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I have numerous trainings around the coaching space through NCDA. So a lot of the things I will use are around storytelling. So taking narrative therapy and branching it out into a coaching space to help clients tell their stories effectively in ways that feel empowering and meaningful to them. So people that know me know I kind of love talking about that ethical area between mental health and coaching. And it's one of my favorite passion areas too, because I think coaching can be a lot more accessible from a privilege standpoint. Mental health care is very expensive. It's something that's typically only accessible in urban areas. And as I've mentioned, obviously, a lot of the work I've done has taken a lot of consideration to rural areas where coaching can be a lot more accessible because I don't have to be licensed in that state to provide coaching in that community. So it creates a lot more freedom and access.
And you're also an adjunct professor.
Yeah, I'm an adjunct professor. So I've kind of taught all sorts of different courses. So I've actually taught a community ed course, meaning for folks in the community who are looking for more direction. I did that for a couple of years. But yeah, I've been an adjunct professor at 3 different universities in Colorado. And I love it. Right now I teach in the counseling program at Metro State University of Denver and University of Colorado, Denver. So and my students will know me as being a very passionate person, which will probably come through in this podcast.
Which is great.
So.
You mentioned 3 really cool questions that kind of they set the tone, they give a backbone to coaching. Do you mind walking us through those? Because I think they're really powerful and they're probably questions that a lot of queer people are asking.
Yeah. And I can't take credit for coming up with these questions. They're ones I've heard over the course of my career from my mentors. But I think it is kind of 3 parts. I mean, think of it also like a triangle because they'll all influence each other. But who am I? Where am I going? And how will I get there? And depending on if that's like a career coaching lens or a life coaching lens or a financial coaching lens or a relational coaching lens, like we'll bring that into the table. But so they're very kind of broad questions for that purpose. We would use your goals in mind, depending on what type of coach you're working with. And those types of coaching I mentioned are all ones that IM Counsel offers. And so that's why I kind of think about those. But the biggest piece I think of it, like kind of the foundational part we'll start with is who am I? And why this is so important is in the world, there's just so much noise. We are always hearing other opinions. We're hearing advice. We're hearing the media. We're hearing news. The amount of information people take in today compared to 20 years ago is over triple the amount of information we'd get each day. Think of like, your smartphones and things like that. So our brain actually can't even compute how much information we're getting. It's overwhelming. And so how do we know that we really want to take that next step or commit to that relationship or come out to our parents? How do we really know that that's what we want as an individual? So the question of who am I is helping. What I think of when I do that work with clients, it's helping them silence the noise around them and listen more to their internal voice. I use a lot of contemplative techniques, a lot of mindfulness of just kind of grounding and saying, hey, how do I know what a yes looks like to me? How do I know what assurance looks like? And taking that time. So who am I think thinks of like, what are our values? What's most important to us? Not what someone tells us we should be, valuing, but what do we find most valuable? It's thinking about our personality styles. So I have clients who will use things like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or, strengths, Clifton strengths. We all have different language we might use, but this idea of what is our personality style? Does that feel congruent to our personality style, that decision? So like, again, I'm thinking about, I think about how this influence, especially within the queer community, of like safety. Just because your friend came out in the way they did doesn't mean that's the right way for you to come out. So knowing who you are might help you know the best way to step out into your truth. So I think of that's the foundation. And as we learn more about that, who you are, that forms the other parts of the triangle. That's going to help us think about where you might be going and what feels the most important to you today. So that that next question of, right, where am I going? That might be that goal of, again, coming out to parents or, talking with your boss about your transition, starting HRT or something, right? Something that feels like an important step that you're ready to take. We're going to take those pieces of who you are and we're going to think about how do we want to get there? What feels right for you? And I say we a lot when I'm working with clients. Like I think of coaching as a partnership. The client's the expert on them. They're the one that's walking this every day and living this life. I'm there really to be a resource, to be an unbiased third party to talk through things about, to bring some tools to help empower that client to make those steps. Because I can't go out and come out to their parents. The client needs to feel empowered to do that if it's the right move for them, right? That's how these work together. Maybe parents aren't safe and they're not actually part of client's life. That might be a conversation we start to have. So from there, right, that next piece of where am I going? And then how will I get there? So as you've already started to see, some of these things I'm talking about will influence the how will I get there. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a fluid process that I'm always thinking about. And sometimes I'll even draw the triangle with clients and we'll take time looking at it. And often I'll ask clients, hey, where do you feel the most stuck right now? And where do you feel the most empowered? Maybe you know so well who you are, and you're really just feeling stuck on how you want to get to that next step of where you're going. So that's where we'll focus in. Again, you're informing me with your expertise of you. So that's kind of those three questions. And obviously they're very broad. We'll look at a lot of things underneath that, but that's the framework that I approach most of the work. Because again, if you're engaging in a coaching process, it's because there's something that you're thinking about, a next step, a goal, a movement you want to make or shift in your life. And so I think all those three questions inform whatever it is that's kind of leaving you feeling stuck or uncertain, or like there, is something missing or different.
I think a lot of people approach either therapy or coaching with kind of this banner question of what do I do? What do I do in my coming out, or what do I do in my career? And I think that these questions really break that down. Who am I? Where am I going? And how will I get there? A mentor of sorts of mine, Richard Rohr, once said, Isaac, you will answer the question, what do I do, when you answer the question, who am I? Mm-hmm. And I was really frustrated when I heard that because I wanted help knowing what to do. And it almost sounded too simple. Mm-hmm. But I am in full agreement with you now, several years later, that when we do focus on this question, who am I? We
Mm-hmm.
collect so much beautiful data and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost as though we find the connection to our own inspiration, and as it's totally my language, but we find our connection to our own desire again.
Mm-hmm.
And that gives us a really beautiful compass. Is that what you're seeing in the coaching process?
Yeah, I think that's so spot on. I mean, exactly what you're saying. Like, we find our connection to our own desire, not our mom's desire, not the American dream desire,
Yes.
right? What is our desire? And we're so disconnected from that. That's, again, kind of maybe a stereotyping statement, but I think with just how much news we have, how much information we have, how overwhelming it is, um, there's such a busyness today that there's often a disconnect for folks to really know in a true grounding within themselves, what is it that I desire? And then a lot of folks that I've worked with, they might have inklings or, spaces. I think many of us know at our root what we really want, what we're interested in, what we're motivated by. But there can also be a lot of shame wrapped around that of, oh, I shouldn't want that, or that's selfish of me to want that. And I think of the coaching process, how it differs a little bit from therapy is like therapy, we might address that shame and where that root of that shame comes from. I think of in coaching, we think about how to move the block of shame. So we're not necessarily working through any of the roots. Again, therapy is more past focused, coaching very future focused. A trained coach can't, again, unless you are working in the state where they're a licensed clinician, if they're also a licensed clinician, coaches cannot practice therapy. But what I think of with that is, with clients, it's like, what is that? Again, kind of centering into themselves. What does that desire look like within you?
Mhm.
What might that belief system be costing us? How do we take those small steps? It's again going back to the how do I get there? How do we take small steps to work around that shame voice or move that shame voice so we can move into that desire, that inspiration, that knowing that is already within us. And so you'll see, like in coaching, I think of coaching as a very active process, very collaborative. Not that therapy has that space as well, but again, instead of focusing kind of on that past and spending time, working through where the roots of those that shame voice came from, we're kind of going to say, how do we move through it? And not everyone, it's not shame for everyone. I just think of that, especially I think within the queer community, can come up because of so many years of living in the closet or just not having role models. It's, if we think of right in 2015 is when same-sex marriage became legal in the United States. 2020 is when we saw final remove, equal protections under the Civil Rights Act for workplace protections for gender identity and sexual orientation. Again, up until 2020, so not even as old as the pandemic, is workplace protections for trans and queer folks. So we really don't have a lot of models of what this looks like. So I think that's where within the queer community, I notice a lot of times there can be uncertainty, there can be shame, there can be an unknown because we just don't have. There's just so much that living life in a closet does.
I oftentimes say on the podcast that even though we come out publicly, we still leave our desires in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of the phenomenon of you can only tolerate so much of me because that's the voice of the closet. And so if I come out, I might feel a little bit more liberated in that way, but I fully holistically cannot come out. So what I really want still stays in the closet.
Mm-hmm.
And I hum and tiptoe and poke at it, but never engage it. And I feel like coaching is this really beautiful process that helps us go back and grab that very precious parcel and put it to use. I just watched King Richard. It's a movie about Venus and Serena Williams and family and their dad and all the sacrifices that their mom and parents made. And it's such an inspirational movie, but what really strikes me about that is the process of coaching, that it becomes so minute. For them in the movie, it's this open stance versus closed stance, the slight rotation in the wrist, and like all of these really fine-tuned things that really make something successful. And I think getting in touch with our desires as queer people is so important, because it's the fine tuning of saying, I want to help people, but then is that nursing? Is that therapy? Is that physical therapy? Is it massage therapy? Is it financial?
Mm-hmm.
And to really find those nuances and to really unearth, or maybe what's in the subconscious, and coaching helps bring it up to consciousness, which
Mm-hmm.
is really, really liberating.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and again, why I'm passionate about coaching is, um, it's can be so much more accessible because we're not necessarily looking through the root of some of those pieces. It's a faster process. You'll often work with a coach much less time than therapy. My average coaching clients, I might have actually for only about 8 months to a year, if that. Whereas, therapy clients, I might see much longer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, helpful to think about, just in the sense of like, because it's a financial commitment. Coaching isn't covered by insurance. It's not necessarily a regulated field. Our coaches at I Am Counsel are trained, have coaching or, again, counseling, social work backgrounds, and are trained on their fields of expertise, which I think is really important when you're seeking out a coach. But because of kind of the way it's set up, I have family all across rural Kansas, and I talk with them sometimes about someone in their community who is doesn't have any resources. There's no mental health resources even in that town, let alone resources that are safe for the queer community. And I'll get family members reaching out to me, and they can't see, and they say, how do I make this referral? Who do I? And, it's like helping them try to find therapy resources is almost impossible. Thankfully with telehealth, they can find some options, but it's nothing in their homes, community. But with coaching, they can connect with anyone around the world, actually. So we can connect with them. We can meet with them via, the beauty of technology, and come in and have a face-to-face, a virtual appointment with them, and engage them in ways that, again, I think therapy can kind of leave behind. I think there's I recognize that could come off as sounding kind of negative. I think there's a huge importance to being licensed in the state you practice in. We have to do that. So we're mindful of all the state laws. That each state makes their own laws. And that's why that happens. And so that's really important. And we can edit that out if that's important.
Oh, sounds great. There was something I was thinking about. I find that for me, my profession is something I do for a paycheck, absolutely. But for me, I feel lucky because it is definitely something I feel like I was called to do or destined to do, or I just knew somewhere in the fiber of my little bones that this is the chair I'm supposed to sit in. I don't think that's a common experience for a lot of people. And I know that when we strike upon that, when we find that thing that really jives for us, it's not only professionally liberating, but there is a lot of personal beauty that can be found there. How have you seen that maybe play out in the lives of your clients?
Yeah, it's very true. So that piece about it's not a normal thing to like just feel totally enraptured by the work you do. I will say it's becoming more and more common. So looking at it from like a generational stance, a lot of the silent generation, so that would be maybe grandparents, or that's before boomers. So could be parents or grandparents of many of our listeners. It is the silent generation folks, a lot of times work for them was a means to provide. And there's a reason we kind of call them the silent generation for a variety of means, but generationally work was very different for them. And then we have boomers who A lot of, my background, my bachelor's degree is in history, so I'm going to take you through a little history lesson. I love looking at the generational understanding of how we understand values in work and those types of things. But essentially, boomers, they benefited from, that's the time and era of post World War II. We've got some economic shifts. We've got the Great Society. That's going to be towards later of the boomers, which is like where we call it the Great Society, or sometimes you'll hear it called like the alphabet soup. This is where we get programs like WIC, so women and children, kind of what we think of like food stamps and a lot of different other types of things. A paycheck actually typically at that point, could pay for and sustain a family. So you could be a manager of a grocery store, a local grocery store, and make enough to support your family at home. And, so for boomers, they kind of gave this all to this career because it provided them a lot of financial mobility that we hadn't seen previously. And I'm like really simplifying a lot of this. But where we start to see this and why we see younger generations shift away from this is we see recession after recession. So in the 80s, there's a recession. There's, just like small dips in economic market. That's very common. We're not talking about like the 2009 or 2008-9 recession, but lots of dips in economic movements. And so we see Gen Xers and millennials, children of boomer parents, who saw their parents give everything to their work and lose their jobs. And this creates a lot of anxiety. So Gen Xers especially have a lot of my career is not meant to fulfill me, but I'm also not giving my all to my career. We'll see that more on Gen Xers. And then we see millennials who are saying like, hey, I actually want my career to fulfill me because I've seen how unhappy this has made generations of workers before me. And I know that my work will not have my back. Especially if you think of most millennials, we look at millennial generation like 1980, some people say 95, some people say 2000. Where the crux of that, if you think of like coming to age, is right around their prime workers in that 2009 recession. So either graduating college, in the beginning of their career, and, just saw, hey, I thought I was supposed to hit all these milestones and I would be successful just like my boomer parents. And I'm not. I can't afford that house. I can't afford this. Or I've got student loans. Again, in the same time period, college has gotten more expensive because there's more expectation of what we call wraparound services, so providing mental health services and so on. And we're not publicly funding it anymore. So actually most public, I shouldn't say most, but like I think of some key public institutions I've worked at have almost no state funding, if at all. So where this happens then is we see from millennials and Gen Zers, Gen Zers obviously are just now coming up into the workplace, this desire to make meaning with their life, whether it's through career, through relationships, through their online presence, but have meaning be a huge part of their life. Because again, we know that at the end of the day, a career won't have our back, a job, an employer isn't going to be able to take care of us. We saw that again with these economic trends. We're seeing that again with the pandemic. So long story short, a lot of the clients I work with want to find meaning in their life through every aspect. So again, relationally, through their career, through all these different components. And I think that's kind of comes back down to like, we're probably not going to have every pot full at all times. There's kind of a realisticness of that can like leave an emptiness of striving, like we're just striving for this. But understanding, so I'll talk about kinds of like, where is the compromise? Where do you not compromise? What are your non-negotiables? If you've ever worked with me, you've heard me say that before. I say we're building your measuring stick, because that's how you're going to measure the decisions you make in life, whether it's again to stay with a partner, to move for a position, to decide what house you might want to buy. That all goes back to the idea of who you are, where you're going, and how will you get there. So if we build that measuring stick, and like knowing again over life, you will change. You might have kids, you might get married, you might lose a beloved friend or family member. Those things shape us and shift us. So typically we kind of say like research is that we don't change, deeply in our core so much as we get to adulthood, but you are also always changing as a person. Your values will shift and change. Your desires will shift and change. So when I work with clients to build that measuring stick, I also talk with them about how do you adapt that measuring stick? How do you check in with yourself to know, does your career give you meaning? Maybe your career is a place, maybe your work is a job right now because your home life is giving you so much meaning, and you need a job where you can be home more. And again, I saw a lot of awareness around that with the pandemic, where people are saying, is it worth it to me to be out in public for this type of paycheck when I have a person at home who is immunocompromised? And so clearly you can see I get on this soapbox about this because this is important to me, but knowing that it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I'm kind of laughing thinking about this because I was just listening to a podcast earlier this week about the All or Nothing Marriage, which, if you're not familiar, it's a book by a researcher. And I was listening to a podcast featuring him about how even we approach marriage and relationships from this all or nothing approach. And that's not a bad thing, is kind of what he's saying, but there's a lot of stakes. There's a lot, it's a high stakes game, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing the same thing with career. We're seeing the same thing with owning property. And so that doesn't mean that that's a wrong thing. But kind of echoing even just what that author says, is it's this aspect where, how do we diversify? Our marriage can't necessarily be all or nothing. Our house can't be all or nothing. Our career can't be all or nothing necessarily. It could be. And sometimes we find that diamond in the rough, and it's amazing if we do. It can be so deeply fulfilling. But there's only so much we can control. So how do we move and diversify? Just like we might diversify our portfolio of funds, our money, how do we diversify where we're getting our meaning in life? So from friendships, from relationships, from a job or career, from an animal in our life, our pets, to our hobbies. So that's kind of the work I talk about with clients, is you're a multifaceted person. So how do we diversify that over all the different areas you live in that are important to you?
I kind of am finding myself thinking a couple of things. One, coaching, it's just such a sacred process. I wonder if there's the conception out there that therapy is top tier and coaching is somehow like second rated. Like, oh, you got a coach but not a therapist, poor thing. But in this way, I do feel like there is so much wisdom behind career coaching, and the goals of it aren't necessarily to go backwards and heal, which is the goals of therapy. But for coaching, it almost sounds like identifying goals and moving forward, but with this really profound type of liberty, like this authenticity you tap into that spurs you forward, which just sounds amazing. And with this kind of diversifying, if you will, or this diversity of satisfaction, I think that it sounds like what you're saying is coaching isn't necessarily about finding the job that's going to be your destiny, like I feel like mine is, but almost finding the life satisfaction wherever it comes from for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you touched on that sacred work. One of my career mentors and heroes and birthday twin, Spencer Niles, once said in a training I was in, career work is sacred work. And, he has such an interesting life history. He actually was training for the priesthood. And I can't remember exactly what ended up happening I think he desired, again, it goes back to who we are, where we're going, how we'll get there. I think he had a deep desire to get married, and he couldn't do that in the priesthood. And he was like, if I have this desire, then this means that it's likely, not the right fit for me. And if I got that wrong, Spencer, I'm sorry, but that's my remembrance of that. And so, right, like that doesn't mean, he found meaningful work. He's he's actually got a really beautiful theory he's been working on. That's one of our most prominent theories that addresses the holistic view of life and career. But this idea of this work is sacred work. And there is a lot of stigmatization around coaching versus therapy. And I think a big part of that is, because I was mentioning earlier, coaching isn't regulated. And so what that means as a listener, you might be like, what does that mean to me? It does mean that anyone can provide coaching. So there is an aspect on your part of, doing, I would encourage you, if you're looking at a coaching organization, researching. So one of the top coaching trainings in the country is ICF, International Coaching. I think Federation is what the F stands for. That's who will train coaches. You'll also find many, many mental health professionals will go a coaching route. I actually have many friends and colleagues who opted to never get a licensure and to stay in the coaching world because licensure actually can be really, it can really tie your hands on a lot of things from a legal and ethical perspective. Whereas in coaching, again, we can be a lot more collaborative. We can be a lot more future focused, and really, empowering clients to kind of make immediate change and action. So you'll see, again, there are quite a few of mental health professionals. And again, a lot of our staff at IM Clinic, and, also bring their expertise to IM Counsel, which is, that same knowledge, that same skill set. If you find that you really do want to get to the root of that, the past, therapy is going to be a better fit for you. Coaching isn't going to do that work. But it's whether it is, empowering a client to find that their sacred seat in a career or in a relationship or a space. I think a big part of it is actually just helping clients find their knowing of what feels right for them in this moment in time. Decision-making is a constant cycle. You might feel right about a decision today, but again, tomorrow you'll have more information and that decision could change. This all goes back to my measuring stick of how do you sit in the comfort and discomfort of knowing that change is going to continue happening around you. Because the opposite of change is stagnation, and we don't want that either. So even though it can feel scary to be stagnant, I think for many people feels a lot scarier. So I don't know if that really got to your question, but.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I think, let's say that there's a handful of queer people out there saying, Ray, I know exactly what I want to do in the world. I just feel too much shame or I'm too afraid. How could coaching help? What resources do you pull in? What might be some things they could use to maybe get started?
Yeah, that's a great question. Kind of first and foremost, I love talking to those clients just to get a sense of like, is coaching or therapy a better fit? And especially if, kind of like thinking about that shame voice, depending on where it's at and kind of what that is, like a lot of the work I'll do with clients is just doing some mindfulness. So I like to do a lot of contemplative and mindfulness work. And I use a lot of narrative approaches or storytelling approaches. So what this looks like with a client experiencing, shame, I might try to say, like kind of working with a client and from a coaching perspective, how this might look is a technique I kind of often will use is getting a client kind of grounded into themselves and find the root voice of their own inner champion. So, finding within themselves, where's the voice saying I'm good enough, or the voice saying I've got this, or I can achieve these dreams, or whatever it might be. And I know just over a podcast that can sound hokey, but it's about kind of actually finding again where that yes feels like in the body. And this comes from a mentor of mine, Linda Fichet. She's a local practitioner. She used to teach up at Naropa, but kind of taking this contemplative approach around really knowing within ourselves where that noise, again, that externalized noise is kind of removed, because a lot of that shame comes from that externalized noise. So again, in coaching, I'm not getting to the root of the voices of those shame. And maybe again, it was a parent who bullied a child for being queer, or whatever it might be. We're not going to necessarily go and do reparative work around that. That would be counseling. But what I'll do is help the client find that own internalized champion within themselves. And then a lot of the work I might do is how do we take small steps? So shame or anxiety can make this feel very overwhelming. I have this dream I want to do. I know who I want to be in the world, but it feels really overwhelming to go out and live that. well, what's one small step I can do? So I will, you'll notice I'll almost finish every session with a kind of a goal setting technique of looking at like what's something we're going to work on this week or this next 2 weeks. And this is where, again, I think I come alongside and to partner with the client. We can all set our own goals. I'm there to help scaffold them. So, you might say, well, my goal is this week that I want to, I want to have an authentic conversation with a coworker about who I am. And I want to mention that I have a boyfriend, or same-sex partner, I should say, with a female sounding voice, that might not make sense, but, so, a same-sex partner or something, you want to be basically kind of authentically share your story in a way that would kind of, as a queer person, might out you. Again, some people say as queer people we come out all of the time, and others people say that everyone has a little bit of a different philosophy on it. But so, okay, if that's your goal, what I might work with a client around is like, how I'll use some scaling questions, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how anxiety producing does that feel right now? Or, let's just talk about that. Let's rehearse that conversation, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much fear do you feel right now? Or something like, I'll kind of just like name an emotion that I've heard them talking about. If it's high, then I might say like does this seem, like, okay, that's a 9. I'm wondering, is there a different way that we approach this goal? Maybe a smaller step. Maybe we ask that person about, and, maybe through the conversations, like maybe I just want to ask this coworker about a question about themselves. And that's kind of where we get started. So it's going to be unique for every single client I work with. So it's hard to initially frame out what that technique would look like, but it's a lot of kind of using a lot of here and now, just like really understanding who that client is. Again, that's that kind of that narrative approach, like that's their story, they're living it. How do we scaffold and make it feel really attainable? And so that's why I think coaching over time, a lot of the clients that, I use the term graduate, because as we work together, they, again, as you have that measuring stick, as you have that ability to listen to your own internalized voice and silence the noise, you'll need coaching less and less. You're going to continue to step out into your truth more and more in ways that are safe for you. Again, this is never a process where you should be putting yourself in a place where you're unsafe, meaning, questioning or going against your own boundaries. So we will do boundaries work even in coaching. And so as you move through that and get to that space, you'll find you'll need coaching less and less because you're living that authentic life that you wanted to create, and you've created it over the course of time in a way that actually felt a lot more manageable.
I often tell my clients this, and I really do believe in it, but it's my job to work myself out of a job to equip you to not need me. And that's the whole point of a coach, is to say, I'm here to help you perfect the skills that then you can take and go on your beautiful, merry way.
If you're a listener listening at home and you're working with any sort of mental health professional or coach who's not actively working themselves out of a job, I will say, and I always make this distinction, psychiatry, that's a little bit different. Your doctors, you will always see those folks in your life. But most counselors, we are working to try to work ourselves out of a job because at the end of the day, just like you're saying, like our clients, we want them to be empowered to live their own authentic lives.
Yes, for sure. One book that I am thinking of right now that I want to kind of mention is Crossing the Unknown Sea by David White, and he spells his last name with a Y instead of an I in White.
Yes, I've seen him speak before.
He's just a gem. Like he's a poet, so he speaks poetically, and his books are beautiful, and I can't put them down.
Yeah.
But one of the things that he does say in his book, when he was transitioning from being an employee to kind of a full-time poet, if you will, is doing one thing every day. And then after a year, you can turn around and say, I just did 365 things to get me towards my goal. And I really do believe in that, especially when we're looking at coaching. I'm working with a personal trainer right now, and to see the progress, it's not overnight, but the consistency of working with that coach, it adds up.
Yeah.
And I just so believe in the coaching process, not only because it allows us at all this queer staff we have at I Am Clinic to work with people no matter where they are in the world. That's the number one piece of coaching, but two, so that they have access to kind of the life satisfaction that anybody else has. And of course, I will fight tooth and nail to make sure every queer person has access to that. And I know that you are as well. One thing that I do find particularly fascinating about your wisdom, and I do mean that honestly, is just the way that you're so cognizant about at least the laws here in Colorado and sometimes even federally for the protections of queer people and trans people, dead naming in the application process, what names you have to put where, and how to kind of navigate some of the more sensitive issues from an HR perspective of being queer in the workforce. Do you mind if I was a young trans kiddo just out of college and I didn't want to put my dead name, even though it still might be my legal name on an application? How would I move forward with that? What do I have access to?
Yeah, this is an area I'm incredibly passionate about because unfortunately, like what we know is discrimination happens, implicit bias. So again, like this idea of unconscious bias is one of the big contributors to how people get screened out in the job search process. This is why often actually one of the top ways to find a job is through someone you know, because and it has nothing to do with like parent, mom, dad, it's usually a third degree or more separation. So like your friend introduced you to their aunt who introduced you to their coworker who gives you an interview. It's because there is, there's a fear of the unknown. So when you become a known candidate, things feel a lot safer. And so what that means is especially as a trans person or as transgender folks applying for positions, the name change process is time consuming and can be costly. So there is an aspect, right, where you might have a legal name that's different than your preferred name. And really, I think of like in your job searching process, there is already so many places where you don't have a lot of power, right? So like you are looking for a job, meaning someone else has power. They have a job that you are looking for. They have income you are seeking. And so I'm all about how can you maintain as much power as possible in this process. And so your resume, and this is true for every single person in the United States, this is US-based culture. So if you're listening not in the United States, I would encourage you to get to know customs in your home country. And fun free fact, there's a resource called Going Global. And you can actually usually access it through your Department of Immigration or your local library. So the US Department of Immigration pays for Going Global. So you as a citizen can go log in, or you don't even have to be a citizen, but you can just go through their website. But just search Going Global. You'll probably find a workaround to get to the portal that's paid, again, through your library or through your Department of Immigration. But they actually maintain resume facts for almost every major country in the world. So this information, if you're a listener not in the US, this is really only true for the US. But in the United States, a resume is not a legally binding document. So what does that mean for you? That means you can put your preferred name on your resume. And this is great for our trans clients. This is great for just every single person. Maybe you have a preferred name that you go by that is a shortened version of your name, or you go by a middle name. I always say, what name will you know when someone calls you on the phone? Because that's the most common way they're going to invite you for an interview. If someone calls you on the phone, what name will you answer the phone to? So if you get dead named in that process as someone's inviting you to an interview, I imagine that would cause a lot of internal turmoil. And so putting the name you prefer to go by on your resume, and it is not a legally binding document. You should always be truthful on your resume to the best extent possible. So if you're being true about the name you prefer to go by, then you're following kind of the rules, so to speak, of a resume. You will have an application, and that is a separate document. So most mid-sized and larger companies. So this is not going to be true of companies that might be like 50 people or smaller, 20, 25 employees or smaller. But most companies over a certain size in the United States have to follow what's called equal employment opportunity law. And so they will have an application process that goes separately to HR. That is where you do usually have to put your legal binding name. It will say, what's your legal name? Are there other names you've gone by? And that kind of information. That is a confidential document that goes to HR. It really and truly shouldn't be going to the hiring committee. They shouldn't have any knowledge of that information. Every company will work a little bit differently. So sometimes, but again, that's usually the document that HR is going to, pull your background check. And I can tell you again, as an employer, we don't usually see the background check, or a hiring manager, we don't see the background check. We're told by HR what the background check pulled up. Like, we saw some flags around trust. This is since this has to do with money, we're not sure you should move forward with hiring. We'll see that if you have, that will only come up if you've been convicted of a crime around theft. So like, that's like what that language looks like. So realize I'm probably giving more information than what you need, but just know your resume is not a legally binding document. You can put your preferred name. So for myself, my name is Ray. My middle name is Ann. If you grew up with me, you knew me as Ray Ann. That's what my family always called me, because I was bald until I was about 4 and wore my brother's hand-me-down. So no one knew my gender identity, and I do identify as female. And so I actually will put Ray Ann on my resume so people understand that I'm female identified, because I don't want to get misgendered in the interview process. Now, there have been times I've put just Ray, because I know that male privilege can carry me into places that that my female identity might not get me into. So those are ways we can actually work take back some power in our resume process. So I love to geek out about this. If you're a client interested in career coaching, a lot of folks don't know this, but again, because I work with who am I, where am I going, and how will I get there, I do full wraparound services. So I will help a client explore who they are. I'll help a client even with the nuts and bolts of writing a resume, creating their resume, creating their interview materials, what they want to say, any sort of application documents, all of that. So usually a session, career coaching is a little different than mental health coaching. I usually will meet with the client, and then I dedicate at least a half hour in between sessions to work on your behalf on some of those things that we've talked about in session, whether it's, again, reviewing a resume, doing some research on where you might be interviewing, and so on. So it's kind of a little bit different than what you'd experience if you do therapy, where it's usually that's the session and it's kind of a 50-minute session and you're done. So
if there is a young, let's say, I don't know, 22-year-old lesbian in the rural South who just feels so trapped and doesn't know where to begin for career coaching, what advice might you give to her? You had 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I think I'd start, where do you feel the safest? And where do you feel the most like yourself? And safety, I don't mean just physical safety. I mean psychological safety. I mean someone who holds your story and holds it sacred, just like we're talking about today, because we are all sacred beings. So where do you feel the safest, the most seen? And that might not be in a career. It might be with a friend, a parent, a loved one. You might say, I don't have anyone that I feel that way about right now. And I would say that would be where you want to start, is how do we find that one person? They're out there because you were likely that one person for someone else in your life. We don't always see it. We're too close to it sometimes when things are tough. But where do you feel the most safe? And where do you feel the most alive? They might be the same place. They might not. And from there, I would say if there's a person or, a few people that you feel safe with, I would say, this is something I'd really want to talk with the client about before I'd encourage them to actually do this, make sure it's the right fit for them. But, could you, with one of those people, share about what makes you feel the most alive with them? Just one person. And again, I'd want to know if asking yourself, if you hear that, you're like, oh gosh, that feels really overwhelming. Again, I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low and 10 being like, if it feels 5, 6, might be a great step. If it feels above a 6 or 7, before you take that step, I'd say, what's one thing you can do to bring it down, just a half step? So maybe it's that you take a nice bubble bath beforehand, or you watch an episode of Sex Education or something that makes you, brings you joy. And the reason why I asked that question, what makes you feel most alive, is that's a question around that's about who you are. So if you can find a person you feel safe with to talk about, to externalize it and process it, you've already done your first step of career coaching.
Who am I? Where am I going? And how the hell will I get there? 3 poignant questions we all ask ourselves from time to time. These questions not only help us find stability in life and shore up our peace of mind, they also help us deepen in self-knowing. As queer people who enter the workforce, we all show up with varying degrees of privilege. Entering the job market might be so easy for some that they land in a job out of convenience rather than true assessment, while it may be completely overwhelming for others who get stuck wondering how they will survive in the workforce, let alone apply for a job. I am certain that our desires, our emotional cravings are our compasses. And as we take note of all the cravings we have and understand what the cravings are designed to satisfy and what they are designed to produce, we naturally come to see who we are, where we can go, and exactly what traits we possess that can get us into our final position of true satisfaction. In this light, career coaching isn't only about finding the right job, it also helps us build a foundation of knowing who you are, what capacities you possess, and what faculties will activate from within you. This foundational knowing will help guide you to the job that not only honors your whole personhood, but also one that makes it come alive. I know that a lot of us spent years, major portions of our lives trapped in a very tiny closet where people could neither see us, invest in our true self, nor help mold our developmental process so that we could easily become self-confident queer people. It is because I know just how silent our closets were and just how empty we might feel coming out of those closets that I want to make sure you hear it's your turn to shine. And I want you to know just how shiny, capable, worthy, and special every square inch of your essence is. Who am I? I am beautiful, I am competent, and I am capable. Where am I going? To a place where my truest self is honored and alive. And how the hell will I get there? By knowing who I am first. Until next time. Mwah.
Queer RelationTips is a podcast sponsored by I Am Clinic, a counseling practice devoted to the LGBTQ plus community with in-person and virtual counseling options available. I Am Clinic. Create the love lives and relationships you crave. Find us online on Instagram at LGBTQ_therapy and Facebook at I Am Clinic. That's I-AM Clinic.